Well, we're doing a new thing now. And now that we've completed the New Testament, I plan to go biblical one week and topical the next week, because I'm not through with the Old Testament. So we're going to be biblical Old Testament for quite a while, because we're really only up to Proverbs still. So we have a way to go. But then alternate weeks, now that we don't do the New Testament, I'm going to do a topic. So I decided the next 2 times that we're together, which means we're alternating topical and biblical. So 2 weeks from now, I'm going to complete this. I decided to do a particular topic that several of you requested, and it's science, faith, and reason, you see. And it's an important topic, especially in our time, and recognizing that one of the things that God has done is he's actually bumped up the ante of evidence and revealed himself using science and technology, of all things, to reveal his actual greatness and presence, remembering that, for example, it was only in the beginning of the so-called Enlightenment that God revealed, hey, there's a lot more you didn't know about, as you're about to reject me, because they were moving away from a theistic consensus in Europe to a basically humanistic, materialistic, physicalist consensus, as now is the default mechanism in our time. But in that very time, it's not an accident that he said, okay, now I'm going to show you more evidence. Because as skepticism increases, God bumps up the ante of evidence, you see. And so he used the microscope and the telescope, the macroscope, the telescope. That same century of the so-called Enlightenment, in the 17th century, that's when they were both discovered. And that's not an accident. And he revealed, you want to see something? You didn't know there was a whole world right under your feet, and you didn't see it, the microscopic world. You had no idea, nor did you have any grasp of the macroscope and the cosmos. And as we go now, the knowledge just keeps on multiplying exponentially, and it continues to reveal the glory of God in a way that no Darwinian assumption could possibly account for. In fact, the more evidence there is, the more evidence that time plus chance doesn't produce order, it produces chaos. And in fact, more time you have, the less it's likely to occur for a lot of reasons. And so it's quite incredible. So we have a rebellion against the purposes of God, yet God is using it's a delicious irony that he's using science and technology, of all things, to display his glory in a way that's never been seen before. So I thought it'd be fun for us to go through these together, and we'll just see how long it takes. I maybe can do it in a couple of sessions, we'll see. But here's an overview of where we're going to be going. And so we're going to do part of it this morning. So I'm going to talk briefly about worldviews and paradigms, and then 4 fundamental features of the world that I'm going to be using. And here's a presentation I can use that doesn't refer to the Bible at all. And so I'm just using pure science. I've done this now for example, I did it at Harvard Medical School. I did it at the University of Vienna in Austria. And faculty and students there. It was a really interesting thing. And the most fun part is then the Q&A afterwards when you do these things. And so you do this, and it's a really incredible thing, because I show 4 fundamental features of the world and then draw out the implications. And so what we're looking at, first of all, is these 4 features. I'm just going to give you a brief overview of these 4. The first feature of the world is the evidence for the universe's beginning, which has really grown in our own time, especially recently. The second feature of the world that has to be taken into account is the fine-tuning of the cosmos. And it's becoming increasingly evident, especially in the last couple of decades. It just the fine-tuning parameters keep on growing. Third is biogenesis. That means the origin of life. How did you get the first single cell? So, in fact, I deal with it in such a way you don't have to worry about evolution, because you can't even get the first cell. You can't get the first protein. And so all these things are there, and there are obstacles. So how could you get life? What's the nature of life, and how exquisitely complex it turns out to be? And the fourth feature of the world is information theory. The fact that your DNA is rich in information. And those all are features of the world that are incontrovertible. It's just how do you treat them? How do you respond to them? How do you interpret them? So it's, I think, very significant that we have. So a quick word about what I mean by worldviews and paradigms. And a paradigm is a way of seeing, as you know, a perspective that you take. And whether it's a theistic perspective or a materialist perspective, you're going to bring a perspective with you. But you're going to have to deal with the same evidence. And the believer and the unbeliever all have the same evidence to deal with. So it's important to see. Now, the notion here is that science, the typical objection is that science has nothing to do with faith. I'll argue otherwise. And so we'll see that really it requires a measure of faith. When you consider that science appeared only once in human history, and it certainly didn't there was technology. Yeah, there was interesting technology in Babylonia, technology in China, technology in Greece, but they never developed empirically based science, you see. They required a certain worldview, a certain context in which that would happen. It only happened one time, and it happened as a result of the perspective from the biblical orientation that the universe is rational and can be studied. And so, as we see it then, only in the Renaissance in Christian Europe did you really have a point at which you had the conditions for the development of an empirically based worldview based upon science, because you see the universe is rational and can be studied is this idea. This is the theistic consensus. The universe is rational, that it's not a chaos, it's a cosmos, and it can be studied, and we can correspond. We have the ability to grasp what that looks like, because we are bearers of the image of the one who made the cosmos. And that was a part of the theology then that inspired this. Whereas, on the other hand, if you took another approach, if you took Buddhism, Hinduism and Buddhism, they would never have originated science, because they thought that, number one, that the universe is an illusion, and secondly, in polytheism, science wouldn't be explored because they worshiped the creation. And so it wouldn't fit. So you wouldn't ever develop that in the East. And so it was a Western synthesis that occurred. So here's the idea that the universe is rational, and it was this theistic consensus, the logos, an ordering mind, is what's behind it all. There's a mind, a personality. There's an intelligence underlying it, a mind who ordered and organized all things together. So far from being incompatible, the fact is that science and faith work together. It's a reasonable faith. And these men, when they were doing science, especially the progenitors of science, were honoring God, and they saw it as worship. And so when we look at these progenitors of science, the origin and nature of science rose out of a Christian worldview. Did not rise in any other context. Only one time did you have empirically based science that was born out of a Christian worldview. And you consider some of the great examples that you had. You had Nicholas Copernicus, of course, and so you had Galileo. All these were theists. William Harvey, Blaise Pascal, Isaac Newton, Joseph Priestley, Michael Faraday, Louis Pasteur, and Gregor Mendel. Isn't it interesting that these are giants in the origins of science? Every one of them is a theist. That's not an accident. So what it started off as from that orientation, but later on a more physicalist, materialist explanation became more popular. And with the Origin of Species by Darwin in 1859, as Christopher Dawkins, it was I forget, it was Dawkins, yes, who said it was that Darwin made atheism intellectually respectable, I think is how he put it basically, but it really didn't. But it gave the illusion, because they're trying to deal with and explain away what appears to be designed. So their natural attempt is to take things that look, I know it looks organized, I know it looks like it's a design, I know it looks like it's planned, I know that it looks like there is some kind of a teleology, but it just doesn't, actually that's not real, it just appears that way, you see. And that's what they're trying to do, is to get rid of that appearance. So this is, in my opinion, significant. So all of these people saw their act as their science as an act of worship, and it's fully compatible with science. So to see it's that science then and faith, it's an illusion to suppose that the atheist lives by science or by reason alone, and the theist by faith without evidence. And here's why. Because at the end of the day, the atheist has to embrace a worldview that has to have faith. Faith to understand, because he has to believe that the universe is ordered and rational. Furthermore, that his mind corresponds with that rationality. You see that? Where does he get that from? You see, if he's an atheist, there's no philosophical groundwork, a basis, foundation for those operational beliefs, because it implies that our minds are just the byproducts of random processes in the first place. You see, if your mind is just a product of random processes, then your mind is suspect, you see. So you can't even use your reasoning to confirm it because you don't have any basis. It requires something bigger than that. Atheism is a faith proposition. And in fact, it's always wiser, if you're going to be reasonable, not to choose atheism. That's trying to prove a universal negative. You're not going to get there. It's better to be a soft agnostic or a hard agnostic than to be an atheist, because you can't say that God doesn't exist. I mean, you have all of the world's knowledge is a circle this big. How big would your knowledge be? You know, would you take a little? If you draw a little dot, a little circle that's this big, you'd be arrogant. It'd be tiny. So you'd have to know all things to know that there isn't any God. So instead, it's a more reasonable proposition to affirm either a soft agnosticism that I don't know, God may or may not exist, or a hard one. I don't think he does exist, but I can't prove it. But nevertheless, it requires faith. So let's redefine science, because let's see that science, by the way, has been redefined. Because you see, in the late 19th century, it was reduced, and in the 19th century, it was redefined to become not just the scientific method, but rather the scientific method plus naturalism. They have redefined it, and they have a methodological presupposition involved in there. They're basically saying that you have a naturalism as a philosophy that says ultimate reality is nothing but matter and energy and time and space, and that's all there is. And that's what naturalism is. But science never affirmed that. That's empirically based science is based upon a better way. Ultimate reality is they're claiming is matter, energy. There's no God or nothing spiritual. That's not science. Science has always been using a method to use empirical inquiry to go for inference to the best explanation. Go where the evidence leads is where you're supposed to go. And when you impose a methodological naturalism or philosophical naturalism on science, you're imposing something that science never actually had before. And so it's unfair, it doesn't make sense. So there are other kinds of knowledge as well, and it's very important for us to see, because sometimes people have the idea if it's not scientific knowledge, you can't know it. It's not so. There's scientific knowledge, and each has its own entree to truth. There's historical knowledge, and it's a different way of gaining information, isn't there, through history than there is through empirical science. Personal knowledge, Michael Polanyi talked about that, personal knowledge, which is a different kind of knowledge. And there's moral knowledge, you see, and that's not the same as scientific knowledge. Each of these is legitimate, each of them, but none of them are exhausted. There's philosophical knowledge, and there's aesthetic knowledge, and there is religious knowledge. None of these are exhausted, and each of them has their own entree point to understanding. So you have to be very careful here. There's a lot of sloppiness that's going on in the university, as you know, and a lot of these things are just not being grasped. So design theory, the claim is that the quest for design will kill science. And I don't buy that, because it's wrong. The error is that design theory is the same as theology. It's not. There are numerous and growing numbers of design theorists who aren't even theists. One example is the atheist professor Thomas Nagel. And Nagel writes that it can potentially be scientific to argue that the data of DNA and life points to an intelligent designer, even if science cannot tell you the identity of the designer or what is going on in the designer's mind. And that's an interesting concession for an atheist to make. And so, I think he's being honest and right as he describes that. So design theorists, there's a spectrum of it. And this, I find it interesting here. Here's your spectrum. It goes all the way from atheistic evolution to deistic evolution to theistic evolution to six-day creationism. There's a whole spectrum, you see. The real key here is not where you are on the spectrum, but whether you embrace design or not. You see, in all of this, you can have examples of all of them who do. So, for example, Albert Einstein, I'd put him on the deistic. His was more like the God of Spinoza, but he didn't have an atheistic orientation because he said he believed that a super intellect existed. But he didn't think that super intellect was personal. But still, he believed in something more. Then Anthony Flew, whom I met, I remember years ago when I was in Dallas, there was a conference and I met him. And at that time he was the Richard Dawkins of the era, of the 60s and 70s. He wrote a lot of books really arguing strongly for an atheistic point of view. He changed his view. At the age of 82 years old, Anthony Flew concluded that all the books he'd written on atheism were wrong. Now that I admire. That is very, very rare for a man to do that and to say everything because here's what happened with him. He says, I'm impressed with a man who's going to go where the evidence takes him, but what happened is he finally began to understand the nature of the genetic code. And what happened was he realized that there's more information contained in the 6 feet of DNA in each one of your 100 trillion cells than there is in the an entire set of encyclopedias. And if that's true, where did that information come from? And it so struck him that he had to move away from an atheistic perspective. Where does that information come from? It had to be a superintelligence, a God. He was more a deist than a theist. But this design inference is happening more and more frequently. So what they all share in common is the big tent of design. Whether you don't have to, I don't have to prove more than I need to. You see where I'm going with? Any questions thus far on what I've said? This is just preliminary. I hope this is of help. Is it making sense? Is it helpful? Okay, good. Yes.
Anthony Flew was just forgiven by all his.
Yes, he was. Yes. So as a
See now.
they made that claim, and I know that, for example, he was speaking in a venue in Oxford when Chuck Colson was there, and I know that Chuck went up to him and said, "You've gone this far, but you have one more step, and it's a step of faith. You have to go where the evidence leads to you." Wanted to bring him from a deistic viewpoint to a theistic.
Theism that Jesus Christ sought the
Yes, the living word, yeah. And I pray and hope that he did. I think that he was a man who showed openness, and I believe that he probably did come to know him because a lot of people prayed for him and he had that evidence. So I wouldn't doubt that at the end. But that's a radical thing for a man to do. And he says, all my books were wrong. That takes, check your ego. And he says, I'm going to go where the evidence leads. That's astonishing, isn't it? Rarely do you find that level of intellectual honesty. That's why I like Thomas Nagel as well as an atheist who says some of these things. So any other questions on this? So it's important because these things that I'm sharing with you then, I'm not teaching the Bible right now. I'm just teaching pure science. And that's very helpful for me.
Two atheist people I'm talking to now, both doctors.
Yeah.
And strictly at the side.
That's the way to go. Yeah. So that's why I find this to be helpful. Now, there's a lot of guilt by association. Oh, yes, go ahead.
How much do you think approaching death affects yourself?
One would hope that it be painfully obvious in light of one's imminent demise that maybe I ought to rethink these things or consider where is my hope. You see, that's the real issue. What am I putting my hope in? And but most people don't think very well. They don't think from a worldviewish point of view. Remember the 4 questions I've given you before, and they're worth a quick look because it's when I look at the idea of meaning, Wrong one, and it was nice, but it's not this one. These 4 questions, remember these? So the question of meaning relates to the question of where did I come from? Because if you came from just if the impersonal plus time and chance, there's no basis for meaning at all. But if you came from a personal being who knew you and loved you and is the one who ordered this and made you in his image, that gives you meaning. But the second question is identity, and that's the question of who am I? The third question is why am I here? And that's purpose. And the fourth question is where am I going? Hope. Now those 4 questions cannot be answered by empirical or rational means. Those 2 methods of knowledge that God has given to us, that is empiricism and rationalism, those are 2 ways of knowledge. They'll never provide answers to these 4 questions. You need a third way of knowing. The third way of knowing is revelation, you see. And that's that only the scriptures provide answers for that. Now there's a question, I think first Lewis and then Woody.
Let's thank to John Lennox lecture.
I love John Lennox. Just look him up on YouTube and you can't go wrong. Yeah.
An mathematician, and he is the young man of the breed. Then got his first known continent, and he asked him what was his opinion about God. And he could tell the guy didn't like the question. And the guy invited him back to the hotel with 2 other colleagues and asked him and said, "Double, first 2 men, go to the career, God, have you the math? But I'm so insecure." And at that point, he had tried to look back at the young student. He would have been stopped.
Yeah.
Where is that insecurity?
There are a lot of reasons for it. Of course, it's the quest for autonomy. We don't want ultimate reality to be personal. So even people will, I believe they're about to plump for a kind of a panentheism of sorts. There's reasons for it because the neo-Darwinism is so failed and it's become so inadequate that there's going to be a paradigm shift. But it won't be toward theism. It'll be toward some kind of an idea that consciousness is found in the quantum, on the quantum level, or a substrate of matter, or something silly like that. So it'll be a panentheistic kind of a notion. But you're dealing here with a fundamental issue of autonomy, but people don't want there to be a personal God, because if there's a personal God, then I'm accountable. They do not want him to be personal. You could have a panentheism or something like panpsychism, all kinds of things. But as soon as he becomes a person, you have a moral universe, and you know you have an accountability issue. And so there's a natural autonomy in the human condition because of the fall. The scriptures provide a robust basis for anthropology that is rich and meaningful. Our culture doesn't have a basis for that because it's got this naive notion that we're basically good. It's all they've got. They have to believe that human nature is basically good, because if they don't believe that, they're in trouble because they don't have a solution. Only the gospel can look at the human condition and say we have depravity, but we also have dignity. Only the gospel says that there's a solution to the dilemma. But there is a fundamental warfare going on, and it's a perspective that they have that's not biased. It's biased. This is why they'll come up with these things, guilt by association, that you can see up here. This is from years ago, but I still remember seeing this. You call that intelligent? And things like this. And they're trying to equate us with design theorists with being phrenologists or being astrologers and so forth. And listen to this one here. It says, let me see if I can find it a little bit better here. I might not be able to find it here. No, I can't find it. But the idea here is that first you must observe the hypothesis and test and write your review. And then they're saying the intelligent design says,
to spite thee.
yeah. How about I just smite thee? That's so silly. It's not an argument. It's an ad hominem. Those are not good arguments. To argue, just name calling and guilt by association have never been good arguments. People are so culturally dim-witted now. They're so dim-witted by media. They become basically subject to social media that they can't think anymore. They can't think clearly as a consequence of that. But there are sciences that distinguish. Woody had a question before we go.
I think mentioning this great look at Justin Clark, who's the English podcaster, and he's interviewed all these students. He put his book, Rise of the Elite of the Big.
Yeah, it's going to be more of a movement because the evidence is so compelling, but it will not be toward a theistic perspective, but rather, I think, some panpsychism is my guess. Panpsychism, it's all, which means effectively that everything is spiritual. There's a consciousness, but it's in the substrate of matter. It's in the quantum level. And they're going to come up with that kind of notion because they do not want in the ultimate reality to be a personal being, you see, an agent, one who is infinite and eternal. So they reduce it in that way. But there's a natural rebellion against that. We already know that. But I'm just going to be, you're going where the evidence leads. And so that's why I like to use sciences that distinguish design from accident, because you see, to eliminate design as an option is to actually not play with a full deck of cards. Because to eliminate design from the front gate then is a bias that you're imposing upon it. It's a naturalistic bias, you see. So the possibility of design is not inimical with science, and let me show you some sciences that distinguish the two. So we already deal with this. We already know what it is, the difference between design and accident, don't we? And so consider insurance claims investigation it's a vehicle by which was it arson or was it an accident? You see, another example, cryptology has to be able to distinguish design from accident. Artificial intelligence, as well as archaeology. Is this an artifact that was actually a tool, or did it just look like a tool? You see where I'm going? There are criteria that one uses, and this is part of the whole thing. SETI, the whole idea there is looking for a series of prime numbers in the radio signals to find some pattern, you see. So they're looking for that, and that would be design. Random number generation. So all of these things are examples of that. In fact, I was with Raymond last night, and we did a special celebration of my birthday at Bones. We were going to be doing it with my friend Edgar Schaefer from Covington, Louisiana, but Edgar wasn't able to join us. But whenever you go there, they always have these little things, this bling that they give you for your birthday. But what I did is, this was when I was with him. The last time I was with Karen there, but you'll notice there is a signal in the noise. Where's the signal in the noise? Well, you can see here. Yeah, let's see if I can. Right there. Well, actually, it's more than that. You see, because it's this part. You're not going to find that likely that you're going to have this pattern, that thing, this underneath there, and that cake there. So my point here is that if you look at this image here, most of it's chaos, but there is a bit of design in there. You see my point? There's inference to the best explanation. If I saw that, I'd say somebody was here. Somebody made that happen. That's my argument. You see that, and it's easy. We understand what that's like, and we can certainly understand how that works. So there are sciences that do this, and so design is not the same as creationism 2.0, but examining the evidence and going where it takes us. And when you mention intelligent design, it's almost like he's one of those creationists or fundamentalists. Fundamentalism is the new F word in our culture, it seems. And so people just basically, last time I checked, guilt by association and name calling are not good arguments. They have no weight, no merit whatsoever. Go where the evidence leads. Now, there are some design theory predictions one would make as well. And one of those design theories, and I did this quite a number of years ago, and even at the very beginning, they realized that a lot of DNA, only 2% of it in your body actually is related to the genetic dynamic of forming proteins. So they assume arrogantly, if we don't know what it does, it must be junk. That's pretty arrogant, you know. It's just astonishing how dumb we can be. What fools these mortals be, but yet we can continue to do it. And it was easy to predict. I can assure you, that's not going to be junk. There's going to be a purpose behind it. And in fact, as the more we've learned about it, because we discovered that it turns out that what was called junk actually has elegant function, multiple layering that's been discovered in the non-coding DNA that functions at a higher level operating system. So there are actually operating systems within that, and switch genes and all kinds of things like that. So it's not just junk, and we could predict that, and so it's been proven that it's not junk since that time. Another assumption that we can make is that there's going to, as time goes by, it's not going to get easier. It's going to be more complex of information, elegance, not less. And so it will be that you're going to be, I can easily predict that. And so they can be tested and confirmed. And there's a momentum of evidence, isn't there? And as the evidence goes up, what happens? Complexity, elegance, and information also increase consistently. So every year, as information is increasing, so the arguments for the idea of a design world and the implications of a neo-Darwinism notion, the mutations plus natural selection are adequate and given enough time to actually create life or to create order and information, doesn't go against, it goes totally against the facts. It becomes more elegant, more complex, more mysterious, more wonderful, and all these systems all appear all at once because they wouldn't be able to appear piecemeal because it wouldn't work. All the systems, whether it's a wing or a system, a symbiosis, if they're not fully in place, then they would be junk, and it would DNA, or actually natural selection, would eliminate them. They have to be totally working, but there's no gradual vehicle by which they would appear, that they would have. But what you have in the fossil evidence is consistently in the sediments, three things. You have abrupt appearance without predecessor. And then secondly, you have stasis, no change. And then third, you have extinction. The vast majority of species are now extinct, but that's exactly what you would expect. They appear abruptly, and there's no way that you can get a partial this way. So when you get this for example, a dragonfly, or rather I'm trying to think about what would it be. An insect that looks like a leaf. And it has that. So, and there are various ones that do this. Some of them are actually astonishing. But it wouldn't have a little bit, that little like a leaf, because it wouldn't have any natural survival. It has to be all or nothing. And you can't, that'd require an array of mutations that are all beneficial all at once. In fact, it turns out mutations are not beneficial. They're largely just diminishing, so they don't help. But so, if anything, we can see that that's the case so that's my background for this. Now I'm going to go into the four. So any comments there? I'm hoping this is making sense. Yeah.
Wait, we have a request to repeat questions.
Oh, yeah. I'm very bad about the repeating of questions. Yeah.
You put that.
Yeah, he's talking. It's hard to repeat that question, but yeah, older, yeah. That's the question is going to be what evidence do you have for your view? And there's a wide range of views. I have a particular view, but it doesn't. My philosophy or science doesn't depend upon the age of the Earth in this case. You see. So you're having to deal, you don't want to try to prove too much as the wise person. So I can just say I'm a design theorist without having to say how old it is, or because otherwise you're going to be camping on secondary issues. And I think it's not wise to do that. Whether there was a universal flood, whether the age of the cosmos. I have my views on that. But I don't make that an essential argument here because we're dealing with pure science, and we're just saying that what we see is there's a big tent of design theorists, and that's important for us to see. And so the argument doesn't depend upon your view of the age of the universe in order to work. Because what's going to happen is they're going to be trying to camp on secondary issues. And I think it's wise not to focus on that. Yes, I have my views, but this is not the forum for that. The forum is to realize that you have design theorists who go all the way from atheism, like Nagel, to a 6-day creationism. That's the point. Design, what they show is that under that big tent, they all embrace the idea that this is not an appearance of design. It really is design. It really is order. That's the argument. Yeah, there's internal arguments that are secondary, but you can have arguments for that, and it has its place, and I do believe that. But in this level, we're not having to prove that much, you see. I used to try to prove too much when I would speak in a science classroom and all that. I realized I don't need to do that. I have strong stuff that I can use. And these four unassailable features of the world: the universe began, the impossibility of the fine-tuning of the cosmos, the impossibility of biogenesis, the first cell, and then the fourth one is the nature of information. That's pretty good stuff. And I can work with that, and I don't have to even talk about the Bible or anything else. Because that's my point, is to have a modest approach, and that's the method that I'm using there. I hope that makes sense. Yeah. Okay, so it's important for us to get this together, because I don't have to have an agenda of getting through a certain amount of material, but I do think I can get through this part anyway, the evidence for the universe's beginning. So let's take a look at this. I have an if proposition. And so the if proposition is this: if anything now exists, something must be eternal, or something not eternal must have emerged from nothing. You all can follow that? If anything now exists, something must be eternal, or something not eternal had to pop out of nowhere. There's only 4 options with regard to this question. First one, if anything now exists, well, maybe the universe is an illusion. Maybe it's nothing exists. Okay, people plump for that, so the universe is an illusion. The second one, maybe the universe is eternal, and that was the popular view. It was called the steady state theory in astronomy until very recently. The evidence went against it. People wanted to believe that because they didn't want to have a creation event. Third, maybe the universe popped out of nowhere, out of nothing, you see. And now more and more people are plumping for that, quantum foam and things of this nature. And then the fourth one is that the universe was created by an eternal being. You see the 4 options you have there? And so a quick look at each of these, and it'll be easy for us to go through them. So again, I hope this is making sense. But first of all, the universe is an illusion. It has nothing to commend it. Even the full-blown Hindu, who believes that all of life is an illusion, still looks both ways before he crosses the street. You can't live consistently with it. It's an unlivable philosophy. And just stop and think about it. It's a relentlessly consistent illusion. But no one can live consistent with that notion. It lacks rational coherence. It lacks livability. It's like saying, I can't speak a word in English. That's a complete sentence in English. It defeats itself because it's not livable and it doesn't make any sense, you see. This sentence is incorrect. It's nutty. So it's not a viable perspective, and nobody can live consistently with that because their very lives belie that there is a reality there. But the second is the universe is eternal, and many astronomers really wanted to believe this because they didn't want to have a creation event that they had to deal with. And so they didn't want a beginning event because that would raise the possibility of a divine agency. So they proposed a steady state theory, as they called it, in which matter and energy always existed. Always. There was never a time when they didn't exist. And that was the majority view among astronomers in the early part of the 20th century. And the astronomer Fred Hoyle proposed this continuous creation to get around this. That is to say, he postulated that there had to be some kind of continuous influx of new energy so that the universe would not wear out, because the second law of thermodynamics would show that it's wearing down. So he had to postulate that. Talk about faith. That's a faith proposition because he's denying the first law of thermodynamics about matter and energy. And so you have the idea of a faith proposition here, that there was a starting point for the cosmos. And that again, Edwin Hubble discovered that the universe was actually expanding uniformly in all directions. It led others to develop what they called the Big Bang Theory, which was actually a pejorative term at the time. But the idea as it came, and if you go backwards in time, there was some kind of a starting point from which it all emerged, a starting point from for the cosmos. And this has been increasingly authenticated as time has gone by. So in 1965, for example, two researchers with Bell Labs, Robert Wilson and Arno Penzias, accidentally discovered a cosmic background radiation that was uniform. And this gave scientific evidence to the actual beginning of the cosmos. And then the Cosmic Background Explorer, COBE, satellite was launched to measure cosmic radiation, and it's really amplified our understanding. So these WMAP, Wilkinson Microwave Anisotropy Probe, and it actually has, I won't go into detail here, but basically it reveals some very strange and curious things. According to the implications of this, that according to this, we don't even know what things are. 73% would consist of dark energy. We don't know what dark energy is. Just a term that's being made. And 23% would consist of dark matter. I won't go into the details here, but it would mean that only 4% of material is actually ordinary matter. And so that's really getting pretty strange. As Alice in Wonderland put it, things are becoming curiouser and curiouser. The more we learn, the more bizarre the cosmos really becomes. Although these may not be accurate perspectives, but at least they're showing that things are more bizarre and strange than anyone ever dreamed. With gravity and anti-gravity, the universe is going to continue to expand. The evidence we now have indicates that the greater the distance, the greater the expansion rate. That's why they have to presuppose, what's this dark energy that animates that expansion rate? It should slow down instead of speeding up. So there's a lot of mysteries that don't make any sense from this point of view. So we can discern that clearly through science. There was a beginning point. It can't live forever as well as the universe expands. And so when you consider the expanding universe, it means that matter, energy, space, and time didn't exist forever. And then atheists sometimes think they have a show-stopping question. Well, where did God come from? That's childish. Because you're asking God, you're trying to reduce God back to space and time. The very point is he transcends matter and energy, space, and time. So they ask where God comes from as a category error. You see, you're trying to say he's in space and time. No, he's the author of it. He's the only necessary being. Everything's contingent. And so ultimately, if anything exists, there has to be a necessary being who always is and who transcends matter and energy, space, and time. Only the scriptures provide a perspective for that. So we can see that the universe is really consistent with the idea of a beginning event, which is exactly what you'd predict by reading Genesis 1. The second law of thermodynamics is interesting because it relates to the idea of increasing entropy. If you look closely at this cartoon, the whole place is a shamble, a wreck, because the second law, things are wearing out. And so that's the nature of it here. But it requires a constant infusion. It's like you can't, the car isn't going to develop a better injection system if it's just left sitting in the ground. Anything left to itself is going to get more chaotic. It's going to wear down. We all know that from our experience. And that's the reality. So that the total amount of energy is a constant, but that as time goes by, it's an exponential decay curve. And the way I can put this is, let me show it to you this way. I have this here. So the first law of thermodynamics states that the average energy plus mass equivalence density is constant. It doesn't change. Matter is being neither created nor destroyed. You've all heard that. But the second law tells us, on the other hand, that actually, though, that the average amount of useful energy and mass equivalence density is diminishing in this exponential decay curve, which means that there are two interesting places. What's going to happen there, and how did it get wound up in the first place? You see, so you have those two things. And then if I superimpose the two charts, what I end up getting is this. So here, you can't have more useful energy. This is useful energy, this curve. You can't have more useful energy than there is total energy. So that's why this is dotted. You see that? You can't have more than that. Here's an interesting point then. What happened there? Was that the creation event? You see, the clock was wound up, and it's been unwinding ever since. Clearly, it points to a beginning event, does it not? It also points to the heat death of the universe. If given enough time, won't be enough matter energy, there won't energy to sustain life itself. So what you have is this interesting question then, what happened here? Was that the creation, or was that the curse? My own view is that Genesis 3, this is parenthetical, but if there was time between Genesis 1 and 2 and then Genesis 3, which it was, then God would have to have been constantly removing disorder and replacing it with order and infusing it with life, with order, at all places and all times to sustain the world. And he could do that, but it would require a divine being to make it happen. I believe that's what's going to happen at the curse, and the universe was subjected to futility. I believe it's going to be, the second law will be removed. So I find it very interesting, though, that everything points to a beginning event whereby it's either, it was wound up, what happened then before that? If there was, what brought that into being? Who wound it up? Or if there was time beforehand, then some agent had to be supernatural, had to sustain it at all times and all places. And I hope that makes some sense to you, but it doesn't, don't worry about it. I'll just go a little bit further here. So the universe, my argument is that the universe had a beginning. And so that if going back, where was I? The universe had a beginning. And I'm saying that it has profound implications for the way you look at science, faith, and reason, doesn't it? And so the heart cannot rejoice in what the mind rejects. And so I now see that there is more and more evidence for that. So the fact that I'm embracing it in a biblical perspective, but it's being supported greatly by extra evidences and so time is in our favor. The more we see, the more complex, the more it supports this idea of a reasonable faith. So everyone, including the atheists, lives by faith, but the only question is whether the faith is warranted by the evidence. And so that's the main idea here. Now it's interesting, you go into an airplane, and it's there are some people who've been flying for so many years they don't even notice when it takes off and when it lands, or it doesn't make a big. Then there's a guy with the first flight, and it's a white knuckle, deal. And so interesting thing though is that both of them, faith is universal. Everybody lives by faith. Secondly, faith is only as good as the object in which it's placed. See, so here's an interesting example of that. Even though the guy who was the first-time traveler was terrified, his faith was in the right object, and therefore, as a consequence, he gets to the destination as much as the guy who had a greater faith. It's not how much faith you have; it's the object in which you place it. Does that make sense to you? So you have a lot of faith that there's not something in the cockpit like a couple of monkeys. How do you know there aren't? Yeah. So because I assume it has a good record. It could be in there for all I know. We all live by faith. So one's terrified and one's not. But there's pretty good evidence that they're not going to be there unless it's Podunk Airlines. Then I might reconsider it. But you get the idea. So when you consider that. That brings us to, and we're at the right point. We talked about the first feature, so we'll look at the other three features and we'll approach them next time. So, any closing questions? So, does that make sense? Though the universe had a beginning is a strong argument in our favor, and it goes contrary to the actual preferences of people because there is a beginning event. But even thermodynamics demonstrates this. And in fact, it's fascinating that people are trying to cling to the views like the multiverse, which we'll mention later on, in a desperate attempt to eliminate the obvious implications. Because they do not want to bow the knee before a sovereign being. So they have a vested interest in it being an impersonal universe. It's just how that works out. But that's what I love about it. So the evidence for the universe's beginning is very evident in our own time. It's very recent, this whole thing with the microwave background and all of that. And more evidence continues to grow. So it's becoming more solid, not less, in favor of that. We'll look at the fine-tuning again, and that'll be interesting to do. And then third, at the impossibility of biogenesis, and then fourth, we'll look at the nature of information. So what we have, I have about, 2 minutes? Yeah. Yeah, as soon as we say that, where were they outside the universe? You're saying you're trying to put God back in time and space, but he transcends matter and energy and time and space. So to ask where God was, it's a meaningless question, because you see, he operates in time and space, but he transcends them. So he's not bound by time. So he sees all things in a present glance. So he's in our past and he's in our future, and because for him there's no boundary. But so this is why I'm not talking about some kind of a pantheistic or panentheistic idea that God is in the world. But he operates in the world, and he entered into the world. And this is the amazing thing. The Word is the Logos, the ordering mind. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And he took humanity up into himself, and then became subject to time and space insofar as he was there's a man in heaven. So it's a deep mystery how that can work. It goes beyond our grasp. But clearly the scriptures tell us that God is a necessary being. He always is. That's what I am, the I am that I am. So the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. All of those are implications of that. So the Logos then, that ordering mind, is the one who spoke all things into being. And then the Logos actually takes human flesh, takes on humanity with undiminished deity. And he does this so that he can now, the inspired word reveals, as I say, that the infinite word, the Logos, who spoke all things into being, became the incarnate word, so that he could now be the indwelling word. So now you're indwelled by the Logos. You're indwelled by the one who made all things. It's a hard and mysterious thing, you and me and I and you. So the more I study Christianity, the more absolutely unique it becomes, the more rich it becomes, the more extraordinary it becomes. One of the arguments I use is, in fact, the uniqueness of Christianity. That's a whole argument, which I'd be glad to do and take you through some of my arguments for the uniqueness of Christianity, because it's a strong apologetic that it's been underused, and so that we might do that in the future. So we're out of time.